Okay, I'm not sure how many people are on, but anyway, I'm Scott Harvey, and I'm sitting here in my wine cellar, and this is our first country club Zoom video meeting like this, and it's I've done lots and lots of country club winemaker dinners, especially in the Midwest, because my parents are from the Midwest, and I really like visiting there, especially Chicago. I have two sisters that live in Chicago, one in Wrigleyville. She's recently moved, and then the other sister lived all around the city as her husband being a Methodist minister. So such a great town, such a neighborhood town. I really enjoy it there. But anyway, we'll see how this works, and if it works well, we'll do it with other country clubs and hopefully have a good time. I'd like to thank Glenn Grossman for putting this together, and our distributor to make these wines available to you after we're done here. You guys can order them. And then Jana is my wife. She's 2 stories above me here in our house, and she's the one that's putting up these pictures and working all this stuff on behind the scenes. And every time we tend to learn a few more things about how to get it right. And unfortunately, on the last one we did, we got bombed when Brian was doing one of his cooking demonstrations, which was pretty exciting. But anyway, these are the wines that we'll be tasting today. And first I'm going to introduce Mollie and Brian, and then we'll go on from there. Mollie is the assistant winemaker at the winery, and she's the one that actually does all the work. I write the work orders, and she and I do lab work together and discuss and blend together. But I'm off doing lots of stuff of what it takes to run a winery, where she gets to just make the wine, and well, she does a lot more than just making wine, but just a great part of our team. And then Brian is a chef who, of course, winemakers and chefs have a natural affinity because one supports the other. And he has this European chef training, like my European wine training, and so he really clicks well with our company and works well on the sales end. So Mollie, first off, I'll let you jump in and tell them a little about yourself, and then Brian.
Yeah, like Scott said, I'm the assistant winemaker here with Scott Harvey. I've been part of the Scott Harvey team for 5 years now. I actually just had a social media update that I was officially full-time as of Wednesday. It was a total of 5 years. So that's pretty exciting for me. And it's the longest I've been in any one location. It's really common in the wine industry as you start to hop from winery to winery, learn new techniques, learn from other winemakers. And that's what I did post college. So I went to school for enology and wine business at a university down south of San Francisco called Cal Poly. It's in what's called the Central Coast of California, and it's absolutely gorgeous, beautiful wine growing area. And that's really where I started to fall in love with wine. After that, I went up to Napa, worked for a season up there, and then moved down to New Zealand and spent about a year living in New Zealand, and then came home for a couple of weeks, turned around, went right back down to South Africa, did a harvest down in South Africa. I'll talk a little bit more about those experiences a little bit later on. But then when I came home from South Africa, I moved back home where I was born and raised, which is a little bit northeast of Sacramento, and worked in the foothills up there for about a year before moving on to working with Scott. And it's been a wonderful experience so far. I've learned so much, and I'm able to make wines that I'm really proud of, which is a great thing for me just as a person and as a wine professional.
I'd like to add that either through the questions and answers or through the chat box, you guys can type in or ask questions. Jen will monitor them, and then pass them on to us. So anytime during this is more of an informal type way. So anytime you have a question, ask it, and we'll answer the question and then move on with our content. So Brian, how are you?
Living the dream. Living the dream.
You got your glass of
I
wine?
haven't got sick of my home yet, but another month and I might get tired of and have to go get a new one. But well, thanks everybody for being here with us. It's fun for us. We're all passionate foodies and wine lovers. So Scott asked that we talk a little bit about our background, and I'm like Scott. You know, you get into the background, it's like a 5-page resume. It goes on a bit long because when you're Scott and I's age, you know, what we've done, it gets to be a long path. But I think Mollie, I just want to give a shout out for Mollie. Mollie's where we were when we were her age. She's passionate. She's got unbridled energy. Scott and I are slowing down a little bit. We're slowing down a little bit. So, but I love Mollie's passion. And so it's funny, we're all the same type of people. The three of us we're alchemists, and we are passionate about what we do. And very rarely do we think what we do is work. So, so my story is pretty simple. Yeah, I was a foodie way back when. I came out of college with a degree in marketing, and so I ended up in marketing and sales in the Bay Area. But one of the things, it was consumer electronics. So one of the things that happened was I initially found out that I had to go to Chicago every year. And I was like, oh my God, I don't want to go to Chicago. Why would I want to go to Chicago? You know, other than the Blues Brothers, I don't get why would I want to go to Chicago? So I ended up going to CES for consumer electronics for 12 years. And I have to tell you, after the first year in Chicago, the next 11 years, I made all my reservations 6 months in advance because Chicago is one of the greatest food towns I've ever been in. I know New York's great, but I don't think people on the West Coast get it. I had my first Gene and Giorgetti experience, not to mention something that changed my life. And what it was is I was there for CES, and I had heard about this French restaurant in Wheeling. I know all of you know because, by the way, my wife's from Winnetka. She gives a shout out to all of those that might have gone to New Trier High School. There's some people in your neighborhood. If you have, please let us know. Put your thumb up if you went to. But anyway, I went to this restaurant called La Francais. At the time, it was in the outskirts of Chicago, and it turned out to be one of the best restaurants in the United States. Changed my life. I left that place realizing, oh my God, not only do I love food, but he turned me on to my first French Burgundies. Great psalm there. Jean Bochet, I'll never forget, as we say, Jean. He was still one of the greatest influences other than Bob Bocuse for me. And right after that, I went back and said, marketing and sales is not for me. And in 1990, I took my first trip to France, and the rest is history. Got a degree in Escoffier, Psalm 1, Psalm 2, a lot of wine education. I'm one of those chefs that believes wine is critical to a good food. So, yeah. After that, I ended up retiring, and I'm going to tell you more about how I met Scott a little later on. So thanks again for being here with us.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'm sitting here in my cellar. This is a cellar that my grandsons, Jake and Nate, helped me build. And there they are there. Nate's a little guy. His birthday was 2 days ago. He turned 7. And Jake is 10 now. This is 3 years ago. But we moved into this house 3 years ago, and they helped me put these wine racks together, which I've taken from house to house to house. They're kind of unique in that they're kind of like Tinker Toys. You just build them up, and they work great. So anyway, this is where I do all my Zoom media things from. I can just pull a bottle of wine out and off I go, you know. But in fact, these 2 bottles are from the rack right behind me. And my parents are originally from the Midwest, from Minnesota. I really like working the Midwest market because I like the people in the Midwest, and I find them to be honest and easy to work with and good partiers. So I like to drink a lot of wine when I'm there and eat a lot of food and have a great time. So I do look forward to coming back and doing winemaker dinners in Skokie when we open back up and things are open, so I can come back and visit Chicago. I grew up, I was born in Germany and two American parents, and I came back to the States when I was about 4 or 5 years old and moved to California. And I grew up in this area, which is the Sierra foothills of California. It's the foothills up against the Sierra Nevada mountain range. You can see from this map that the big long straight lines in the middle there are the border between California and Nevada, and that's a big long a fast young growing mountain range, the Sierra Nevada. And Amador County is one of the counties that where the California gold rush occurred, and that's what brought wine to this region. Originally, California back in the 1650s started growing grapes here with the California missions when it was part of Spain. And then in 1848, when gold was discovered and we had the 1849 California gold rush, thousands and thousands of people came to what is now Amador County and El Dorado County and so forth. And this is a plaque. A lot of Virginians came here as well in the gold rush, and so they named the vineyard area where these Zinfandels come from, the Shenandoah Valley. There's actually 13 Shenandoah Valleys in the United States, all named after the Virginia Shenandoah Valley. I helped set this plaque. I drove the backhoe that set that stone. That was back in 1979. But anyway, so I've been, my grandfather grew grapes here, my step-grandfather actually, during Prohibition and after. And we'll talk about that when we talk about the Vineyard 1869. So that's kind of how Amador started. The towns today, like Plymouth, back in the gold rush was called Pokerville. This is where our post office is for our winery. It had 15,000 people in it in the gold rush, and today it has 250. So it just was an area that was very thirsty. And Zinfandel is a variety that came from Croatia, from an island off the Dalmatian coast, and it made its way to New York as a table grape. Also made its way to southern Italy, and there it's known as Primitivo, the same grape variety. But it was recorded as being in California before it was recorded as being in southern Italy. And it really suited the California climate. It produces great wines in Napa, Sonoma, here, you know, all through the state. And it's a variety that tells you where it comes from. It screams, I'm Amador. You get that real great earthy character from Amador Zinfandel. Napa Zinfandel has a much more prettier kind of rose petal type character, where Sonoma has a lot of pepper character in its Zinfandel. So it grows well. It crops well. It really adapts to dry land farming, which is all we had back in the gold rush. So it's a variety that became the most widely planted red grape variety in California back in the gold rush. Only a few vineyards survived from that period. Ours is one of them. This vineyard 1869 was mentioned in a deed dated 1869 that mentions that the vineyard was existing then. So these vines are the vines that were planted back in the 1860s. So they're the same exact vine. A vine will live for 400 years if it's not grafted, if it's on its own root. Those roots will just go down deeper and deeper and deeper through the soil. Here's the document that substantiates the age of the vineyard. It's actually a U.S. Geological Survey from 1869 or 68, somewhere in there. And what it was is when the gold rush people came here, they just stuck sticks in the ground and claimed gold mining claims. And then in the 1860s, they started with Mount Diablo, which is a big mountain just south of San Francisco. And from there, they started building up the section corners that normally land is measured by. And when they got across the state to Amador County, this was what one of the surveyors setting the section corners in this area so that they could get all of the mining claims switched over to deeded property, because of course they wanted to collect taxes. And so that's where that document comes from. But it's just, it's just as a winemaker wants to trap the flavor of the wine or the story that the grape vineyard, the vines have to tell in the wine. And so we're going to go through a lot of different things that we do here. But to trap this in there, I really need to get grapes that are ripe, but not overripe. And we'll explain that so that I can make a wine, and Mollie and I can work to get a wine to tell you its story of variety, of place, and of vintage. And so that's hopefully what we can get across with you. Usually when I'm doing this in a winemaker dinner at a country club like Skokie, you guys are drinking the wine while I'm talking about it. So now I kind of got to talk about it and get your mouth watering enough that you'll order some after this thing and try it later. But notice the color. It's not super black. There's a little bit of a red hinge to it. I don't know if I can hold it up so you can see through it a little bit. Zinfandel in the old days was called the Claret of California red wine. In old Zinfandel, when it gets to be 10 years old in the bottle, and these wines are made to be 20-year wines, the people that have a very hard time distinguishing old Claret, which is old wine from Bordeaux, from old Zinfandel. And because it's both areas produce wines that are very much made for food, which with good levels of savory characters in them, which Brian will talk about. But anyway, let's see. Let's see where I am on this. Yeah, so I'm tasting this wine now. Brian's going to go through the Barbera, and Mollie's going to go through the Syrah. So I think we should be able to move on to Mollie. Did we? Let me say one thing about Zinfandel. Zinfandel is made in two different styles, and one style is the style of food wine, which is the style we make it at our winery. The other style is what we call the New World style. And the New World style has a lot of, is a much higher alcohol wine, a much softer wine, very little acidity. It's usually sweet, and it's a wine that drinks well by itself. It's a wine that fits the American market because Americans grew up drinking Coca-Cola, and it just matches that kind of flavor profile. Yeah, okay. And Janet just came down the stairs and let me know I forgot to talk about Prohibition. But I'll explain that too. But first, let's do this New World, Old World thing, because Mollie's got a great video in here that shows you how it's put together. Friends of mine, people that own Clinker Brick and the Seven Deadly Sins, make that New World style. And I think they do a fantastic job in the Lodi area. I think there's a definite place for it. Usually Old World style winemakers like me poo-poo New World style wines, but I don't feel that way. I think that there's a definite place for them. And one of the main components in making New World style wine is an additive, which is just grape. It's made out of grapes. It's just pure grapes, but it's concentrated coloring from the grape skins. And so you have this Old World style isn't necessarily light body. It can be full bodied as well, but it's not real inky like a New World one because of this additive. It has much higher acidity, where the New World style has much lower acidity. And then the alcohol content matches the ability of the wine to tell its story. Usually the New World style wines are made from much higher sugar grapes that are pretty much turned to raisins. And the flavor of raisins is the same, whether it's Cabernet from Napa or something else from the Central Valley, it doesn't matter. You get that raisin, plummy, pruny character, and it all tastes the same. And then the next thing that makes it have that distinctive character is this product called Mega Red that just really gives it a jammy character. And Mollie, you want to show the video on adding Mega Red?
Yeah.
And how it works? Then we'll go into Prohibition.
Perfect. So what you'll see here, hopefully, is I've got 2 glasses here, and I'm gonna pour some rosé into them. Rosé is just a great way for us to show you how this product works. Like Scott said, it is concentrated grape material. We can use it for color as well as to add some sweetness and to add a little bit of roundness to it. What that means, kind of, it fills your mouth. So you see I dropped this is what happens with just 1 drop of this stuff. And that's about 100 ml sample of wine in that glass. But you see how quickly it changes color and how drastically it changes its color. So it's a really versatile tool for us to use. And for some of our blended wines, it's a good option for us. And for more New World style winemaking, it's a wonderful tool for winemakers to have in their pocket that they can use when they need to. So you'll see there that big difference. I'm going to add another drop of this stuff. You see how inky dark it is. And as it mixes in, you'll see just how dark that can get. And again, that's 2 very small drops, and that color is changed very dramatically.
So it's a product we use in our One Last Kiss. We do not use it in their premium red wines because it overpowers the flavor and destroys the ability of the wine to tell its story. So in my past life, I created a product for a winery called Folie à Deux, where I was a partner and president and shareholder. And I created a product for them called Ménage à Trois. And it was made a little bit more in that New World style, pretty much like our Incinerator and our Just One Last Kiss. And it's just the One Last Kiss, though, that we use this product in. We don't use it in the Incinerator either. Back to Prohibition. When in 1919, when Prohibition hit, your wineries were no longer allowed to sell wine commercially. So this is a picture of south of Market in San Francisco, a distillery, and this is all their high proof coming out the window. Just think if somebody had thrown a match in that. But anyway, what happened was you were still allowed to make wine for home use. So we could make wine if you were designated head of a household, so you had to be married, and you could make up to 300 gallons a year and get a home winemaker's permit. And during this period, this home winemaking market exploded. And a lot of the names that you know today got their start in Prohibition. And that, the Gallo brothers, Ernest and Julio, were actually born in Jackson, our county seat of Amador County. And they were what we call jobbers. And they would buy grapes from us, and we put them in these 50-pound lug boxes, wooden boxes, and put them on railroad cars and ship them east. They go to Chicago, they go to New York, anywhere where you had ethnic populations, that, especially Italian populations, where they really wanted to keep the tradition of having wine with the family. And so these guys would buy our grapes and send them off. And another family from Minnesota were the Mondavis. Mondavis were from an Italian community in the Iron Ranges, Cook County, which is also Chicago, up by Duluth. And they sent the Mondavi, or Caesar Mondavi and his wife, to California to secure grapes for them. And that's how the Mondavis got started. But my grandfather would sell grapes, and the vineyard 1869, when I bought the vineyard in 1984, the previous owner, John Downing, was still selling to a jobber. His name was Cacciamatore, and until I bought it and then used it all in my production. But my grandfather sold grapes in the coming out of after Prohibition. He kept selling grapes to home winemakers, and in the 60s, we sold grapes to the Portuguese in West Sacramento for $25 a ton. Now, 50-pound lug boxes, that's 40 boxes of grapes. It's a lot of work, you know, for 25 bucks. If we drove them over the hill, around here we call the Sierra Nevada mountain range the hill. But if we drove them over to Nevada, to Minden, Gardnerville, Carson City, there's a large Basque population that raises sheep on the backside of the Sierras. They gave us 35 bucks a ton. So over the mountains we would go with our boxes of grapes and unload them. I'd carry them down into their basements and dump them into their crushers and fermentation vats, and we go home with the empty boxes. But what my grandfather didn't sell, he put it in the front yard of the on the road there, going through the Shenandoah Valley here. Grapes for sale. He had the grapes sitting in boxes there. And of course, Zinfandel, once it's picked, starts to mold pretty quickly. And so invariably nobody bought them. And he was, and George, George DeMille's his name, he would take those grapes and beat them with like a baseball bat thing, and then pour them into an old dairy tank. And that's what I grew up drinking. There he is there. He was an old World War II tough guy, and kind of a great character. But anyway, I grew up drinking his homemade wine. And then when I went to Europe to go to winemaking school, I came back from Germany in 1976, and I'm sitting at the old table there at the house, and I'm drinking his wine and eating his venison. He shot a lot of venison. And all of a sudden the wine didn't taste so good to me anymore. And I go, Grandpa, how many tons you got in this old vineyard here? And he goes, well, you know, Scott, it's old, and it's there isn't much. You know, it was a vineyard planted during Prohibition, about 5 tons. I go, good, I'm buying it all. I'm gonna take it all to the winery. I go, how much do you need for the family? And he goes, a barrel. I go, good. I'm gonna take them all. I'm gonna pay you for all but a barrel's worth. For the grapes, and I'm going to make the wine, and then when I bottle it, I'm going to bring you back a whole barrel's worth of wine, which is about 22 cases of wine. And so from then on, from 1976 on, I had decent wine to drink at all the family reunions. But he came to the winery a couple of weeks later, and the guys come and get me, and they said, there's an old man out back, you know, and I go back there, and he's got his pickup. He's got the old dairy tank shoved in the back of the truck and the baseball bat. And he goes, Scott, if you're going to make all my wine, he goes, you can have all my equipment. So the baseball bat type thing we still have. It sits in our lab. and we even use it now and again. I don't know what happened to the dairy tank, but that's kind of, you know, how the wine industry works. And I delivered grapes in the late 70s to North Beach, San Francisco. I take a 5-ton gondola right into North Beach and just pitchfork grapes out of it into these old Italians containers, and then they just give me $100 bills and I drive back home. Of course, we got a lot more than 25 bucks a ton back then. But and today, Mollie and I still service, we do about what, $20, $25, $30,000 to home winemakers every year at the winery. Yeah. So anyway, so the first planting in Amador County was the gold rush, 1800s. The second planting, growth of vineyard area in Amador County was prohibition. We increased in grape acreage rather than decrease. Home winemakers liked our grapes because they come in at balanced high acidity, being a high elevation grape growing region, as well as a good ripeness. So the wine they made, because it was so balanced and stable, would not turn to vinegar on them as quickly as other grapes that weren't quite as balanced. So the word got around that Amador County made the best wine for home winemakers, because they don't use any preservatives in the old days, like SO2 or something, or sulfur. And so that's why we grew. And then the last planting is the current planting, current age. It started in the late 60s, early 70s. A home winemaker from West Sacramento, a guy named Charles Myers, was an avid home winemaker who later became a commercial winemaker. He was a Sacramento City College English teacher. But he was complaining in one of his classes that the cost of Napa Valley grapes were just too expensive. And so he, here's a picture of me with his MG. This is an MG that he bought in 1953, new off the showroom floor. And I kept trying to get that car from him, buying it or trading grapes from it over the years. It sat in his winery for 30 years. And then on his deathbed, he told his daughter, he said, have Scott rebuild that car. And so I ended up with it, and I'm still working on it. It's not done yet, but and that's a bottle of his wine, Harbor Winery, and I still have some of his wine in my cellar here today.
I've had some of that wine, and it's delicious. It's as old as I am, but it is spectacular.
Let me show you this. This is a bottle of wine. That's Cordy Brothers is a retailer in Sacramento, and that's a picture of Charlie. And this was made in commemoration of him. It's Amador County Zinfandel from 2015, after he passed away. But anyway, it's nice to just have all this wine sitting around you. You can just pull out of the racks. But anyway, so Charles Myers, one of his students said, well, my cousins grow grapes up in Amador County, and they're a lot less expensive than Napa Cabernet. And so she set him up to meet the Deaver family in Amador County, who are longtime grape growers here from the old Davis Ranch. And he started making Amador Zinfandel, and it was so good that he got Daryl Cordy, as I just mentioned, from who's a retailer in Sacramento and considered one of America's great wine experts. And through Daryl, they got the Trinchero family from Napa Valley interested in Amador County Zinfandel. And from there, from a Napa Valley platform with the Trinchero family at Sutter Home Winery, Amador County was rediscovered as a fantastic area for Zinfandel and later for Barbera. And Daryl got us to plant Barbera at that time, and I've been making it ever since. I think it's the best variety of the region. But so you have those three different time periods of Amador County. And the exciting thing is I got in at the beginning of the third period as a young winemaker at 19 years old in 1974. And it's exciting because, you know, when I made wine in Germany, we had to make what our great grandfathers had figured out. And, you know, there wasn't a lot of experimentation. You know, you had to kind of stick with the Riesling and so forth. Where, you know, here I got in at the bottom, the ground floor, and it's my grandkids that are going to have to make what we figured out, you know, because we get to do all the experimentation. So that's where that starts with this great Zinfandel, 150-year-old vines. This is a 2017 vintage. And so, yeah, that's the 150th anniversary. And it's just, you know, beautiful claret style Zinfandel, you know, nice cherry berry characters, but a little bit of a sharp character, you know, what you get from that good bright red fruit character. So it's unbelievable, and it's the most expensive Zinfandel that we make. We make about 4 or 5 of them. So with that, I'm going to move over and let Brian talk about Barbera and food pairings.
Actually, I got to back up. So I just realized as you were talking about that I've got a Zinfandel story, because this is really about stories more than anything else. And I don't know that I've ever shared it with Scott, so I'll share it publicly with everybody. Back when I came out of France with a passion to open up this high-level restaurant and do a restaurant like never had been seen. Keep in mind, I've already been to Chicago 12 times, so I know what a good restaurant looks like. I lived in Lake Tahoe, Nevada, on the shores of Lake Tahoe, which is, you know, a beautiful place, but very small, just up the hills above us from Amador, which is where I'm from. And so I opened this big restaurant, and so I go to put together this Wine Spectator Award top 100 wine list, because I'd heard you could do it by making sure that it was all this diversified. And I'm sure everybody who loves wines looked at Spectator. And so I get all this wine list together. I open up. It's a pretty big response. I'm happy, and I got a little casino attached. And all of a sudden, this wine salesman comes up and says, well, you've got this drive to have a list, which I told him. He says, but you don't have any Zinfandel. And I said, oh, God, that's true. Yeah. You don't have any Amador Zin. I said, oh, well, yeah, that's true. I'm a Sacramento person, so I know Amador. But I had been trained in France. I was a Francophile. It wasn't from Napa. It wasn't from France. It wasn't from any Italy, Piedmonte, Tuscany. It wasn't really valid. And he poured this Zinfandel for me from a winery called Renwood. And I remember saying, oh my God, what is that? Like, that was an amazing wine. And it made me started thinking, because I had every dish on the menu was paired with wine. And so I thought, well, there's this perfect dish that I can pair with that. Who is it? And he goes, well, it's Renwood. I said, great. I want to go visit him. My day's off on Monday. This was on a Friday. I want to be down there on a Monday and meet the winemaker. I go down there, and I get there, and they go, the winemaker just quit or left. I'm not even sure, Scott, what it was. But I meet Gordon.
I was pushed out. Oh, it was Gordon was after me. I built Renwood Winery in 1979 as Santino, and then renamed it Renwood in 92, 93, and then was pushed out of it by not a very friendly partner in 95. And that's when my mentor, Dr. Richard Peterson, asked me to come to Napa Valley and take over this small winery he had bought off the courthouse steps called Folie à Deux. And then it just went from there. We did for Folie à Deux what the partner at Renwood couldn't do or said I couldn't do for them. And then he ran it into the ground and bankrupted it. And I turned around and turned Folie à Deux into I would say about 17x of what the original investment was for what we sold it for because of Menage a Trois. And that's when Jana and I started this company. When I left Renwood, I took those vineyards with me because, again, they were my grandfather's vineyard, my father-in-law's vineyard, this vineyard here. And so the wines that we have now in our portfolio are the wines that I was making for Renwood that Brian had tasted. So this vineyard, 1869, I started making wine from it in 1979 when I started the original winery Santino. And, my partner didn't have the contracts for the grapes. So I just took all those grapes to Napa and made them all at Folie à Deux in Napa. And then when we sold that winery to the Trinchero family in Sutter Home, they didn't want the grape contracts because they had plenty of their own grapes. And so, and they were very good with me and working. It's the second winery I've been with that they bought, actually. And so I get along with them well. And I bought back all of the wines that I wanted. I got to pick and choose of all the inventory that was there. And we started the Scott Harvey label with inventory right away. And so Jana and I were off and running. That was 15 years ago now. And because of the great team, Mollie and Brian and all the people that we have in this company, it's just been a great success. Now,
wait, Scott, I don't mean to interrupt you, but there was a really important caveat to that story. So I put your wine on the list, you're gone, and then 2 years later, Gordon comes up. I love him, great winemaker, comes up for a wine dinner. And the same people that have been buying your wine on Renwood, which, by the way, was 1869, named differently back then. Everybody, I had all these regulars. And so Gordon shows up and we do a Renwood dinner. And a number of them said, well, this is not the same wine. And that's no pun on Gordon. It's just how important a winemaker is to something as passionate as a single vineyard like 1869. And so that's my Zin story. You want me to talk about Barbera now?
Yeah, and the food pairings.
All right, so what they asked me to talk about primarily was Barbera. By the way, everybody's up talking about what they're drinking. I'm drinking, Zinfandel. Scott, I grabbed the wrong bottle off the rack. How funny. So even professionals like us, I was like, whatever. I just grabbed it and opened it and didn't think about it. So shows you I love Zinfandel. The Barbera grape for me is one of the interesting grapes because I grew up as a Pinot Noir guy. I grew up with French education and English wine education, and it was pretty slighted. I mean, we became a bit opinionated through education about what is and what isn't. And so when I got through the process and actually met Scott after all this time, going fast forward to just a few years ago, Barbera was never on my map. In my song trainings, I tasted it, I'm like, yeah. But a good food wine, nice acidity, structured, really fun. It didn't hit me over the head because I was drinking Italian Barberas. Amador, on the other hand, when I showed up here being a Pinot coming out of Napa, working in Napa, I remember thinking, what is going on? This is a great grape. It's got this amazing fruit structure. It's a really good food wine because it's got a lot of character and a lot of acid structure. And so I just became a fanatic for Barbera and pairing Barbera everywhere I could. So they asked me to show you a dish. Recently we did a wine pairing, food pairing 101. And you'll always notice with me, it's always wine first. So I believe, and I always put everybody on the challenge to pick the wine first. Pick the wine you want to drink, then think about what you want to make with the wine. And that is such a different approach for people, you know, and I always challenge everybody, try that sometime, see how it goes. Pick your favorite Scott Harvey wine. When you get some wine in your front door, you know, think about what you want to work with. And so when it comes to food and wine pairings, Scott and I always preach, as well as Mollie, that all these myths, white wine with fish, red wine with meats, you know, all that stuff that you hear and all the fears that you have surrounding you by doing the wrong thing, forget about it. It is about enjoying whatever it is you have in front of you. It doesn't matter. There are no rules. But there are some simple guidelines, and forget all the experts. I don't consider myself one of them. I'm just somebody with some experience. Just think about acids and fats. And so animal fats, butter fats, fruit fat, avocados, and then the acidity of the wine. And Barbera has this beautiful balance of acidity that broad-based, like I'm a Pinot guy, Barbera does open up to a lot of different dishes, including fish, which I'm going to point out a little bit. So the dish I'm going to show you here is a dish that was served in the White House for Jackie and JFK, and by a chef named Rene Verdun. And so I happened to meet him and learn it. And I saw this dish, and I thought, well, what a simple dish. And to this day, I see very few people ever even knowing about it. And what it is about preparing a chicken in a very simple way, and amazing pairing with Barbera. So on that note, if you don't mind, I'm just going to give you a little quick, I'll let you into my kitchen, and we'll go with that. So we're going to take the chicken, and one of the things that when you're cutting up a chicken, it makes it really easy. If you lift the chicken, you'll find that it just puts the weight right where you need it, and you'll be able to go right through the joints of what you want to get through. So we're going to take the wings off of this. And then this is the cool part of the dish. I want you to just be able to see this. So what we're going to do here, looking at this chicken, we've got the breast and the thigh, and we're going to keep this whole piece intact. So we're going to go down right on the breast. So as I show it to you, you'll see I just went straight down on the breast. So we're going to go right down below, right there, very simply cut. And now you've got that whole half a chicken. You're going to snap at the bone, lift it up, let the weight do the work. Boom. Half a chicken. So now that I've got this half a chicken, I've got the thigh, the breast, and everything all in one piece. I'm going to grab a little smaller knife for this work. So I'm going to take the tenderloin of the chicken off, save it for other things. So I'm going to trim a little of this breast meat off because these chickens are a little bigger than normal. Again, we're going to save all that stuff. And here is the trick move that everybody wants to constantly. This is the most requested dish for me to demonstrate. So in this chicken and thigh, there is a line, and I'll show you a picture later of it. There's a line of fat that goes between the chicken leg and the chicken thigh. So you're just going to basically go right on that line. And you go right between the bone, you go down either side of the bone, and you lift it, and you go right up underneath it like that, cut back, put it down, and off comes that bone. Again, save it for the stock. So now we're getting close to our little package. So we've got the end of the bone here. I'm going to take a cleaver. I'm just going to use my chef's knife, but if you have a cleaver, use that to cut it. And we're gonna literally push this meat down on the bone, exposing the bone. Now we're gonna use a little of the Tuscan blend. Another thing you can do with this dish, which is fun, if you do it a couple times, you start exploring opportunities. You can start stuffing it. So you can stuff it. I've got some spinach here that I'm gonna use on the plate, but you could literally cook spinach, stuff it, cream spinach, cheese, a whole variety of mushrooms. I could think of a million choices to put inside it. So now we're gonna be very, very liberal with our salt blend. People ask what's the biggest secret of chefs. Often they will quietly admit it's salt. I'm not a big salt person. I don't salt a lot of my foods, but this is gonna mix when it cooks with all the juices, and a lot of the saltiness ends coming out into the pan. So now the final assembly is just taking this portion. Let me come one little move here. This breast meat, we're gonna take it, we're gonna fold it into the chicken, and now is the move. The move is to take all this and you end up forming it into a pear shape. So there's a couple ways we can do this. One way is I can use a ring mold. So if you have one of these, you can just take it up and then literally set it back down in the ring mold. You could, of course, do that again. You could take it and literally cook it in the ring mold like that. So you can literally put it in the oven that way and cook it in a ring mold, and then when you go to serve it, it's going to stand up quite tall. And I've done things where we pipe mashed potatoes around it. But for this purpose, I'm actually going to do it the way I originally had it, which was more freeform, and it's the way Rene Verdun did it. We're just going to keep it like a package, like that. Well, there you have it. Maybe Janet could show a little finished product, but yeah. So nothing more simple and basic than a nice chicken dish. It's hard to imagine that's a whole half a chicken, right, Scott? Mollie, I mean, it seems like really, but that is the beauty of it. So that's my Barbera thing. And I sent Jana some images to show you with something after this, which I think people don't get, and there it is. This is my favorite story. One of the greatest pairings we've done with Scott Harvey Wines. We do a monthly food and wine pairing. And this was a middle of the summer, cold, sous vide halibut, wild halibut on some couscous. And we paired it with the Barbera to totally debunk. People don't get it. Red wines, it's about the acidity of the wine and the fat in the food. So I fattened up the food a little bit with some olive oil and some other things, but the halibut is a pretty lean piece of fish. So it shows you this is a beautiful wine to pair with food. And so there's one of the great seafood pairings with Barbera. Right there. For me, it was the best one I've ever done in my career. Oh yeah, that's right. For Cinco de Mayo coming up, we were talking about great Cinco de Mayo pairings. Here's an amazing dish that we did, which is a loose cheese enchilada with the Barbera, with a nice light little chipotle sauce and little cilantro flavored olive oil kind of drizzled in. So and by the way, those little yellow things are fried chickpeas. So yeah, great wine. Order it. You'll find it to be the most diversified wine you could use in the kitchen.
Great, thanks, Brian. So next is Syrah, and Mollie's going to talk about Syrah. She has a lot of experience with Syrah not only being made in California, but all over the Southern Hemisphere. So go ahead, Mollie.
I've made Syrah in pretty much every winery I've worked in, from the central coast of California up all the way through up here, and as well on the eastern coast of New Zealand and the western Cape of South Africa. So that first map you see is kind of New Zealand wine regions. Where I was during my time is, it might be a little tough to see, but it's that really pale kind of lavender color on the central part of the North Island, but on the east coast. And that's an area called Hawke's Bay. It's really interesting because it's highland plateaus, so it gets really, really warm, particularly in the growing season, their summertime, which is February-ish. That was about when I left here to go down there, was February, early March. And it was just as hot as it gets here in Northern California. So it was up in the 30s, 40s Celsius, which is about 100 degrees up here. And the interesting part about that is not only was there that heat and those big plateaus, but it was also right on the ocean. So you're getting this coastal influence with the heat. And so the wines there, and similarly in South Africa where I was in kind of, you can kind of see that goldenrod color right in the middle, that kind of little drop there. And that's an area called Stellenbosch. Similarly, that is on the side of a mountain, but it overlooks the ocean. So it gets just about as hot, but it does get that ocean influence. And what that allows the wine to do, especially with Syrah, is it develops these really deep, dark flavors. We talk about black and purple fruits when we talk about those dark flavors. So you think about real dark plum, really deep kind of pruning notes, as well as pepper, and black pepper in particular. So in both those regions, that's what we saw. Of course, in South Africa, they actually call it Shiraz. Where I was in New Zealand, they called it Syrah. The same grape, but Shiraz is named after the Iranian city of Shiraz. And the Australians did that in order to differentiate themselves from Syrah producers in the old world. And South Africa adopted that as well. Now, the big difference for us is that we don't get that marine climate influence. We don't get that marine fog, none of it. So we see a very different type of Syrah develop. Ours, it tends to be a little bit more in that red fruit category. So you see things like raspberry, cherry, Coca-Cola is one of the things that, some of the descriptors that we use to describe, in particular, our Mountain Selection Syrah, which is the first bottle that I'm drinking today. I don't know who saw it in the chat, but yes, I am bouncing back and forth between two bottles of wine. And the Reserve Syrah has a little bit richer notes to it, still more of that red fruit character. We don't get into that dark, meaty quality. You get a little bit of that more steak tartare versus kind of cooked meats, which you can get a lot from Syrah. You can get kind of bacon fat and those rich, dark flavors. Ours tends to be a little bit lighter, which allows it, like the rest of our wines, to pair wonderfully with food, because that wine's not competing with the food, it's complementing it. And so Syrah's been a great wine for me to make across my career because it's super versatile. It grows well in a lot of different regions, but Amador Syrah is special, and it's some of the best Syrah that I've been able to make. And it's pretty phenomenal, and I'm proud of the Syrahs, particularly these vintages. These are relatively new vintages for us, and they're pretty spectacular.
Great. So I noticed somebody's drinking the Harasti. Harasti is a very famous player in the gold rush era of the California wine industry. He was a Hungarian that came to America and wine producer that made wine in Ohio originally, and then went to Southern California and then to Sonoma County. His two sons married the two daughters of Vallejo, who was the ruler or the general that ruled the Spanish era of California. And Val Harasti is named after those two families and a direct descendant of them. So his name was Vallejo Harasti. And I've done business with him. I've made wine and sold it to him in bulk, which is what goes into the wine that you're drinking. Not particularly this bottle of wine, but in the past. And he does a great job. So it is a piece of history when you drink that wine. You know, family history. It just goes on and on and on. But so Jana, do we have any more questions that you'd like to have answered? Okay, if not, Jana, you want to wrap it up? Oh, okay. So I don't know. Yeah.
Okay, well, we want to thank you all for joining us this evening. And if you would like to see more virtual experiences like this, just go to our website, scottharveywines/events.com, and that's where we have all kinds. We have a whole schedule of experiences for the month, and so we hope that you will like us on Facebook and follow us on Instagram, and we'll meet again hopefully the next time Scott is in the Illinois area.
Next time we're allowed to leave our homes.
Yes, exactly. Well, hopefully that will be soon.
Yes.
This is a picture Mollie took from behind the winery. So when we open back up, our picnic area looks right out over the vineyards there on this photograph. And so we hope to see you there too. And it'd be great. Thanks for participating.
Yeah. Cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Na zdrowie.